Thank you once again for all of you for joining us. This session is about funding your master's degree here at the Columbia University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. My name is Kate Jenkins. I am one of the team members here. I'm going to go over a little bit about how Columbia works, the people that you want to be in contact with, and sort of some of the structure of that. We'll go through the cost of attendance, which is your directly billed costs of tuition and fees, as well as those indirect costs and what to expect, and talk a little bit about how your registration and the use of what we call enrollment categories or residence units here at Columbia will impact what that cost of attendance is and how you can determine what those costs might be as you make a plan for the fall and for the academic year coming up. We'll go through a little bit about the different funding types that are here available to you at Columbia, including institutional fellowships and scholarships, as well as different employment opportunities. And we will talk about the loan options that you'll have available. A little bit about the timing and next steps in this process as well. And at the end of this presentation, there is an admitted student timeline, sort of a rough sketch of how things happen over the course of the summer as you get into the fall. And as I mentioned before, we're going to have an opportunity for some question and answer. But if you do have questions as we go through the session, please feel free to just pop those into the Q&A, and my colleagues who are on the webinar will also be able to assist you. So first, let's talk about the people here, right? As a student in a master's program, you will have contacts within your department that will be vital in you navigating the process of continuing through the program over the course of the year or 2 years, however long you take to stretch that program out. The first person is going to be your master's program director. Not all departments have a specific master's program director. In some cases, the director of graduate studies and the director of academic administration and finance work closely with the master's students, but some of the departments have a specific person dedicated just to the master's program. So make sure within your department you are in contact with the right people. And we actually maintain a list of the departmental contacts on our website. So you can see that linked there. If you go to the financial aid sort of homepage, you'll see that linked along the right-hand column. And financial aid is responsible for working with those departments to get funding that is awarded. Scholarships and fellowships are awarded at the departmental level, not by financial aid at GSAS. So any scholarship opportunities or fellowships that you're receiving from Columbia are going to come from your department. Now, in many cases, those scholarships are in the letter of admission, but for some departments, scholarships are determined after admission. So again, check on that departmental contact list, or if you've already been in touch with those folks in your department, reach out to them. We work to ensure that those funds are applied to your account, but we don't actually make that determination. So if you received a scholarship or you're inquiring about scholarship opportunities for your program, start with that departmental contact. Now, financial aid is sort of like this in between. We're going to get information from your departments about scholarships that they have determined to award you. We'll also then work with you if you're borrowing any loans to have funds applied. But we don't actually produce the bills or collect the tuition and fees. That's done at Columbia through the Student Financial Services Office, which is a central university team for the entire university. And I think student financial services and financial aid can sometimes get confused for students who maybe are not used to having those distinctions. In financial aid, again, we're going to process the aid, but if you have questions about your actual billing or you're engaging in, say, a payment plan, that's going to be with student financial services. So when you're reaching out, it's important to understand which office you're reaching out to. If you're reaching out to student financial services about the status of your loan, you may not get a response, or the response may be delayed because that team, again, is managing the full university, all students who are billed tuition at Columbia. There are also other offices throughout GSAS as well as Columbia. The student affairs team is going to be on hand to help you with registration questions, and they're going to offer some information sessions a little bit later in the summer as registration approaches so that you can get a better sense of how that process works and what steps to take. We'll talk briefly about enrollment and registration in this session, but there will be a fuller session from our friends in student affairs later this summer. As well as Compass. Compass is our career services office, so you do have access to a team there to help you with, say, mock interviews and other resources for finding employment after graduation. Compass does not assist with like on-campus employment, but there are opportunities for that we'll talk about, and other offices that you can reach out to. But that department is your primary contact for most things. When we talk about the cost of attendance, we break that down into two different kinds of costs, right? So there are a number of direct costs: tuition, fees, health insurance. Those are generally the same for all students who are in a program, though it may vary based on, again, their enrollment status. Indirect costs would vary from student to student. Financial aid creates a cost of attendance that has an estimated cost for living. That's the cap of what you can have in terms of all types of financial aid for your overall costs here at the university. So when you are receiving scholarships, fellowships, whether those are from Columbia or external sources, in addition to any loans you may be receiving, all of those types of aid come under this umbrella of your cost of attendance. And the total types of aid that you can receive for scholarships, fellowships, sponsorships, loans, all of those need to work within this cost of attendance. You can see we do have a cost of attendance website here. Right now, those costs are currently estimated for next year. The cost of tuition and fees are finalized by the Columbia trustees in June. So these estimates are available for you to make a plan. Actual rates will be updated on this page, as well as in the calculator that we're going to share with you. But if you want to get a sense of what some of the costs are for the programs, this has been updated. You can find both the tuition costs and fees and the indirect costs on our website. So certainly take a look at that if you want a little more detail. Now, when you look at this information about tuition and fees, you'll note that there's a different tuition rate based on these residence units: a full resident unit, the extended residence unit, a half residence unit. And here at Columbia, for the master's programs, you would need to complete a total of 2 residence units. Now, depending on which program you're enrolled in, your program may have a specific requirement for enrolling in a full residence unit in both the fall and spring semesters. Other programs allow you to enroll half-time or part-time and spread that program out over more semesters, multiple academic years. Your tuition and some of the university fees are driven by this enrollment category. So when you sign up for classes in the fall, when registration opens in August, you need to add this enrollment category. That's how the university recognizes that you're an actual student. If you just add some courses, you have 12 credits worth of coursework added to your enrollment or registration for the fall, but you don't have one of these enrollment categories, you have no residence unit assigned, you won't have any tuition, you won't have any health insurance. You essentially aren't a student without this enrollment category. So we'll stress it again at the end of this presentation because it's the #1 reason that students are confused about their bill, confused about why they haven't received a refund, confused about why they haven't had aid dispersed, or why the gym won't let them in. Until you are registered in your enrollment category, you're not registered fully. So once registration opens up, make sure that you understand that this is the driver of your tuition and fees. So let's look at an example of what an estimated cost of attendance could look like, right? First, let's look at the direct costs. And those are, again, the charges that generally are the same for students across a program. And that would be tuition, fees, health insurance. And this is a breakdown of the fees. This assumes a specific type of enrollment. As we mentioned before, that cost of attendance has different tuition rates depending on your program. So make sure that you are doing the math based on the correct program of enrollment. But in this example, we've got a student who is enrolling in the human rights program. They're going to take a full residence unit each semester, so they'll be a full-time student for both the fall and spring semester. You'll note that there are a couple of fees that are applied only in the fall, are different from fall to spring. You may be able to waive them. They may not be appearing. So this example is a US citizen or permanent resident. And so they don't have, for example, the fee charged from the ISSO for maintenance of your visa status. You could enroll in a dining plan. You could enroll in rent. Those items will also be charged directly to your student account and be part of your directly billed costs. But in this example, we're doing sort of a simple tuition and fees. You'll note on this that health insurance can be waived. The health services fee is mandatory. So if you have comparable external health insurance, let's say you have coverage from a parent or you have coverage from a partner or spouse, you can submit a waiver of the health insurance, and then that cost would be removed from your directly billed expenses. Students who enroll in at least half time, so full-time students, are charged automatically that health insurance fee. Students who are enrolling less than half time would need to opt into health insurance if they would like to have that, but the health services fee will always be assessed. The document fee, students ask if that's something we can waive. That is a mandatory fee. It's a one-time fee charged your first semester of enrollment here at Columbia, and that gives you access to transcripts and things for life. So if we look at this student's direct costs for the academic year, it's roughly $82,000. The costs are broken down by semester because you're also billed by semester. So the fall charges will be billed in mid-August and a payment will be due in late September. We'll talk about how, if you have loans, how that will be impacted or other aid. But know that you will have, if you're enrolling in both fall and spring, you'll have two payment deadlines, one for your fall charges, again in late September, and then another in the spring in late January. The spring bills are typically generated in mid-December. So you have time to plan for that bill. But we've actually created a great little tool to help you plan for your costs over the course of the whole year. So if you haven't found this yet, we're going to take a look at what our estimated billing calculator can provide you. This will walk you through selecting which program you're in, planning what your registration category, your enrollment category is going to be for both the fall or spring, and then it will populate what those directly billed costs are expected to be, whether you're an international student, whether you're going to enroll in Columbia Health Insurance. And then along the next section of this, you can apply credits that you have, for example, your tuition deposit, which is applied directly to your fall charges. You can put that in as a credit if you're receiving a Columbia Fellowship or you have external funding sources. You can add those into the calculator. Let's say you have some savings. Family is going to contribute a little bit. You can put those pieces in and it will help you to determine what your total costs are. So let's look at this in a little bit greater detail. So underneath the section where you determine what your credits are going to be, you'll find a section as well about federal loans. So if you're a US citizen, permanent resident, that section applies to you. And private loans, if you are a US citizen, permanent resident, or you're an international student, the private loan option is available. The calculator is going to take all of the information that you put in at the top of that left-hand section about your registration and enrollment and populate for you what you would need to borrow in federal loans or private loans in order to cover just those directly billed costs, right? So in this calculator, you're going to take the information on the left that's calculating what you need to cover your bill, put it into your borrowing chart, and then what that does is populate those loans for the net amount, right? You'll notice the difference between this borrowing chart of I'm borrowing $20,500, but the net amount that I receive is $20,284. This calculator is going to do the math for you for those federal loans, which both the direct unsubsidized loan and Grad Plus loan that we'll talk about have fees associated with them that are deducted from the disbursement. So the net amounts will populate into the calculator, and then bingo, you don't have any remaining amount due. You've made a plan to borrow, to use your resources to cover that cost, right? And if you want to play around with your residents, you can change the enrollment. It will update the tuition, and you would then need to update that borrowing information. You'll note again that the borrowing amounts would update as you update your charges. Now, same effect, right? You end up with no amount due. But what about the other costs? What about those indirect costs? So let's look at that. Now, again, the indirect costs in the cost of attendance are determined to be the same for all students. It's not necessarily true that your costs are what we have populated, but these are the costs that are based on an average of costs for students across those programs over the course of the last several years, and determined at a central university level the average cost that we would have. So students who are looking to borrow to cover their costs, their food, their housing, personal expenses, would have access to borrow these amounts in loans, minus anything that they were receiving in scholarships, fellowships, right? It gives you sort of an estimated cost of what you could budget over the 9-month period of enrollment. Remember, this is not based on your living expenses for the whole calendar year. These are based on the expenses for the academic year, which is from August to May, so a 9-month period of time. What that gives you is, just under $30,000 in estimated living costs. As I said, your costs could be more than this, your costs could be less, but the amount that you are eligible to receive in aid has to be within this total cost of attendance, the direct and indirect expenses combined, of roughly $112,000, $111,500, right? So this is, again, an estimate. Your individual costs could be less, we hope. Your individual costs could be more, and there are options to explore if that's the case. For example, if you have dependents, you have children that you're supporting, you're in university housing that is family housing and more expensive, you can request a budget increase, which would allow you access to additional funds for borrowing, additional eligibility to borrow more loans if your costs exceed this. We have very few students who actually request an increase to the cost of attendance for borrowing. So that tells us that this is a pretty good guide to what those costs could be, and that most students are able to live within that total cost of attendance budget. And how do I figure out with that calculator what my refunds might be if I am borrowing that cost of attendance? So in the little borrowing chart underneath where you would be inputting what you are expecting or what you're planning to borrow for the year, you'll see a maximum Graduate Plus amount and a max for the fall and for the spring, right? That's the amount based on that total cost of attendance that you could borrow. If you input those, you'll notice that it results in having a refund each semester. You'll also see that the refunds are slightly different, right? Part of that is due to the difference between having any tuition deposit applied to the fall and no tuition deposit applied to the spring, as well as the difference in health insurance charges. The fall health insurance covers you from August 15th through December 31st. The spring health insurance charge is for your coverage from January 1st through August 14th of the following year. So you do have 12-month coverage, but the spring charge includes additional months for summer, and so is a higher amount. Again, this is just an estimate. We will update the calculator once the tuition and fees are actual, which means you can play around with this to get a sense, but it's a little too early to actually, take out loans or make any borrowing plans, or actually make any applications for loans. But you can get a sense of what your costs are going to be and start gathering resources for yourself in terms of different funding options that you can have. And let's talk about those funding options again. Institutional fellowships. These are, determined by your department. Reach out to your department. The availability of these awards varies from department to department, but they are limited at all departments. Most departments do notify students of any scholarship or fellowship with the letter of admission, but there are definitely departments that do a later application process or notification process. So be in touch again with the departmental contact to determine the timing or how that funding works within your own department. Here at GSAS, there are other scholarship and fellowship opportunities that come up throughout the academic year, and those are announced as they become available. In some cases, those will be shared via a mass message from our GSAS fellowship team. Other opportunities are listed on our upcoming fellowship webpage, which we'll link to a little bit later. What you'll actually find is that most funding opportunities, despite what you might think, they're not coming from financial aid. They're actually going to come from other places at GSAS and other places throughout the university, not financial aid. There are also some awards that are at the university level, meaning students from all schools or most graduate schools would be eligible to apply for those. One that comes to mind are the inter-school fellowships. That application is generally open this month. It's probably going to open a little bit later this year as they determine which of these fellowships are available for the coming year. And the deadline for application for students who are considering applying for the inter-school fellowships is usually sometime in mid to late June. So there's plenty of time to do the application. These inter-school fellowships are very, very specific. For example, you are a female person who went to college in Iowa and plans to return to Iowa. So really, really specific. Maybe some that are a little bit more broad, like you're a resident of Vermont. But again, take a look. They generally are, from $1,000 to $5,000. So they're not going to cover full tuition in any way, but they can help certainly to offset some of your costs. I also wanted to mention the Dolores Lieberman Fellowship because it is a frequent question for our office. It's a very generous award that covers full tuition as well as provides a living stipend. However, please understand that this award is not determined by Columbia. Columbia, as a whole institution, can submit 3 candidates as finalists to JP Morgan who make the determination about this award. So 3 candidates from all schools across Columbia are submitted. So certainly something that you can consider. The timing of this makes it a little problematic, I think, for master's students because the application is generally available in December with a January deadline, sometimes late November, but again, usually December, and that would be for the following fall. So if you're completing the program for this year, those determinations in 25-26, the determinations were already made. The Office of the Provost also has other fellowship awards that you might want to take a look at, as well as once you're here and you're sort of settling in, there are other institutes and centers across the university that allow students from all campuses to apply. So be on the lookout for that. One of the best places for you to get information is the biweekly newsletters that come out to MA students. So GSAS creates a biweekly newsletter. It goes out right now, it goes out on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday. And that has a list of just different opportunities sort of gathered into one place at the school or external to the school that have upcoming deadlines for fellowships and, again, other opportunities that are there. So take a look at those. We understand that you guys get a lot of email communications. Our office really doesn't reach out unless it's very important. And so if you're getting an email from financial aid, please read that. But definitely take a look at that biweekly newsletter when it comes out. That's a really great starting point to find what's coming up. Other places to start the search, where you can start the search now. On our external fellowship page, you'll see a couple of different search engines. Be mindful that even as you identify yourself as a graduate student, you'll probably get returns from those search engines that are really for undergraduate students. The reality is that a lot of awards, a lot of organizations want their awards to go to folks who are getting a first degree. We all support that, right? It just means that makes it a little bit more limiting in terms of graduate funding that's available. But definitely take a look, search for any awards that might fit for you. If you find awards where, let's say, you're very close to meeting all of their criteria, but maybe there's one piece that you're not quite the best fit on, definitely reach out to those organizations. What we've seen in the past is that for organizations that have very limiting criteria for their awards, sometimes they don't get the applicant pool that they expect. So if you are just sort of off by one condition, reach out to them. If the award's worth it, it might be worth it to continue through, even if you're just like not the best fit on all of their criteria. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, we do also maintain an upcoming fellowship and award opportunities page. It's maintained by our fellowship office. If you see something that's on there that's either out of date, it's possible we haven't gotten the information to update for the next year. Some awards may have offered in the past and are not offering in the future, or skip a year. So just take a look and see what's out there. The onus is sort of on the student to find some of these awards. And unfortunately, again, things are limited, but there are resources out there. One of the things I also want to mention is that I think students miss out on opportunities to look for awards based on their own personal affiliations. And so any affinity groups to which you belong or have been a part of, or say your undergrad institution, look into award opportunities for alums, look into award opportunities that are sort of less traditional in terms of maybe funding opportunities to travel or funding opportunities for resources besides tuition. There are funds out there. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of students who request for an increase to that cost of attendance. So it means they're cobbling together funds in a variety of sources and through a variety of means to sort of meet all of those needs. The next type of opportunities and funding types that I wanted to talk to you about are work. For U.S. citizens and permanent residents, know that GSAS does receive for our graduate students a federal work study allocation. Federal work study is a federal funding source that is provided to the institution as a whole, and then that institution determines allocations to various underlying schools or populations. So GSAS does receive federal work study funds. If you are considering federal work study, we have information about that on our website. Financial aid would apply the federal work study allocation to your financial aid awarding account, but we don't administer the actual positions or the payment of you if you get a federal work study job. There's a dedicated federal work study site and individuals who manage that process at the university. So you can apply for federal work study. When we award that, it is a base amount each year. This year it was $3,000. We split that evenly across the fall and spring semesters. If you utilize that full amount and are continuing to be employed, You may reach out to us to see if you have eligibility to increase your federal work study. And if we have funding still available in federal work study, we can increase your allocation. So know that there's a base amount that's going to be awarded if you make that request. And then if you continue to work and utilize all of those funds, then there's the potential for you to increase additional funding from work study if it's available. Other opportunities open to both international students as well as domestic students are teaching assistant, departmental research assistants, and reader positions. And those are all coordinated within your department. So some of those opportunities won't be known yet. They are definitely competitive and often limited. What we encourage you to do is self-identify with your department that you want to be considered for these opportunities. Historically, a lot of them are determined sometime in, say, October after the semester has begun and things are sort of determined. Faculty is determined where their research is going to go for that year, or based on, what course needs or enrollments happen, teaching assistant positions and reading positions would be made available, as well as Compass in terms of your work opportunities as you gear up to graduate. They are definitely still a great resource for career advice, again, mock interviews and other resume opportunities. So keep them in the back of your mind, but work most closely with your department for opportunities if you're looking to work while you're on campus. Okay. So now that we've looked at all of the things where you wouldn't have to pay it back, let's look at loans. There are loans available for graduate students. You can apply, and we encourage you to apply for what you would like to borrow for the full academic year. And the calculator is sort of based on that. But you can apply for loans based on a semester. Now, why you would apply for the full year, particularly if you're applying for a private loans have a credit inquiry. So if you apply in the fall and take on educational debt and then go to apply in the spring, your credit history will have changed because you now have that other debt. Your credit score may change, and it may change the ability for you to either secure additional future loans or change the rate at which you might receive those loans. So what I would encourage you always to do, if you plan to be enrolled both semesters, fall and spring, apply for loans to cover both. When we set up any loans that you choose to borrow, they are split across the fall and spring semesters typically, unless you've confirmed that they are for the fall only or the spring only. The loan amounts that are assigned to the spring won't disperse and won't begin to accrue any interest until the spring semester is beginning. And so that means you can make changes in advance and change what you've borrowed, even though you've set it all up. You can just reevaluate whether that plan remains the same for the next semester or if you need to make changes. All of the loans that you have access to are not based on need, which means even though for federal borrowers, you'll complete a FAFSA, they'll determine an expected contribution for you. That number doesn't have any meaning in the determination of your aid because the aid is not based on need. It's just based on you being a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, and eligible for federal loans. The interest for all of these loans, whether they are federal or private, begins to accrue from the date of disbursement on the disbursed amount. So as I mentioned before, the spring amount isn't going to disperse until spring is going to happen, which means the interest isn't going to begin accruing until that disbursement occurs. So the interest of any borrowing that you have would be staggered over time. But if you're making a plan, anything that you can reduce from the fall to delay any resources that you have that you want to front load can reduce that interest accrual, right? And if you have a change in your plan, let's say you make a plan and you're borrowing in the fall and the spring, but then you receive an external scholarship, fabulous. You get a $5,000 award from your undergraduate organization, and now you can reduce your loans by $5,000. Great. The federal loans have a really great window of time, 120 days from the time that the funds have dispersed, wherein if you cancel and return any portion of that disbursement, it'll be like you just borrowed less from the beginning. So let's say you borrowed $10,000 for the fall semester. You get that $5,000 award from your undergrad institution, and you want to reduce that $10,000 loan by $5,000. You reach out to our office. We have a loan adjustment form request that you can submit, or you can email us. We make that change to your loan to return the $5,000 to your lender. That creates a balance on your account for the money that was there that you then use that external award or other funds to apply and reduce that borrowing. Now, instead of having a $10,000 loan that's been accruing interest on that $10,000 original principal, you'll have a $5,000 loan and accrue less interest. Great plan, right? So keep this in mind as you plan your borrowing. With private loans, there isn't necessarily that cancellation, but any ability that you can cancel and return, reduce a future disbursement, that makes it less expensive when you get to the repayment of things. And of course, we encourage you to borrow only what you need. For our U.S. citizens and permanent residents, there are two types of federal loans in addition to private educational loans to which you have access. The first type of federal loan is called the direct unsubsidized loan. Again, all of these loans are going to accrue interest from the date of disbursement on the disbursed amount. The direct unsubsidized loan doesn't have a credit check, so it's as close to a guaranteed loan without technically being guaranteed as you can get. You need to complete the FAFSA, and then there are a couple of other online forms that you'll complete in order for that loan to disperse. But if you are a U.S. citizen permanent resident, you're not in default on previous federal loans, and you have not borrowed $138,500 in these federal direct loans, then you would essentially have eligibility. The eligibility is capped per academic year at $20,500. And you'll see that in the calculator. That's the max amount that we give you in this loan type. As I mentioned as well, and you'll see there is a fee of 1.057%. That fee is deducted from the disbursement. So instead of $10,250 in the fall, you get $10,142, right? The interest rates on the federal loans, both federal loans, is a fixed interest rate, which means it's the same interest rate for the life of the loan. So when you determine what your repayment amount is going to be, if you select a fixed repayment plan rather than, say, a graduated plan or an income-driven plan, you will know the amount of your monthly payment for the life of that repayment plan. These loans don't have, however, any prepayment penalty. So again, if at any point during either your enrollment or during your repayment, if you have an opportunity to pay down the loan more aggressively than what you're being billed, that behooves you because you're reducing the interest over time and reducing the overall cost of the loan. And that's true for both the direct unsubsidized loans as well as any private educational loans that you take advantage of for both U.S. citizens and permanent residents. No prepayment penalty. For the federal loans, the second type of federal loan that you have access to is called the Graduate Plus loan. The Graduate Plus does have a credit inquiry. Unlike private loans, the credit inquiry is really looking to just make sure that you don't have anything really adverse in the last several years. So they're looking for things like a tax lien or a bankruptcy. In cases where, let's say, you're a new permanent resident and you don't have a lot of established credit history, no credit history is better than bad credit history. So it's a very sort of, it's a less stringent credit criteria to qualify than private loans, but there still is a credit inquiry for this Grad Plus. So if you're concerned about that, we can look at that earlier as we get later into the spring. You'll have time if, let's say, you have something adverse in your credit recently to either appeal or add an endorser or cosigner to that loan. So those are options that are available. The Grad Plus, as I mentioned before, also a fixed interest rate. The fee for this loan, however, is a bit more significant. So you'll see in those calculations on the billing calculator, that the net amount you receive is significantly less than the amount that you borrow. The amount that you're repaying is the amount that you borrow, not the net amount that you receive. So keep that in mind as you're going through that plan. Private educational loans. For private educational loans, there's a bit more variety out there. The interest rate could be fixed or variable. It could be tied to the repayment plan that you select. Most lenders, private educational lenders, have tiered rate structures wherein if you have a really great credit score, then you get a really great interest rate. And if you have a less great credit score, you get a less great interest rate. Consider having a cosigner. 2 signatures on a loan are better than 1. But for most of our students, if you are looking at private educational loans, you may be looking in comparison to the federal loans. Right now, those interest rates are actually going to be probably pretty similar. The fixed interest rates for the direct unsubsidized loans will be determined in May. They are sort of hovering around where they were for this year, which was just over 8 and 9%. Private educational loans are based on market rates, and those are hovering in that area as well. So in terms of a difference, the federal loans have a lot of other protections built into them in terms of your repayment obligations and opportunities if something happens. Let's say you become ill or you take time off to start a family. Federal loans have a number of protections built in when you're in repayment that allow you to forego paying like you will while you're in school. You're not required to make payments on those loans while you're in school. Private loans, most of them will not require you to make payments while you're in school. Some lenders will require you to pay interest that's accruing while you're in school, but they will have more limited opportunities to defer payment after you are in repayment for things like illness or other life circumstances. So keep that in mind as well. What we tend to see in borrowers are those who are less uncertain, are more credit or more risk averse, will tend towards those federal loans. Private borrowers tend to be students who have a really clear plan about how they're going to repay that. Maybe they have a cosigner and they're getting a really great interest rate deal. But again, it's sort of a personal decision. It's based not just on who you are when you come into school, but who you see yourself being when you graduate and how you plan to make those repayments. We can help you as you get into that review process if you have questions and you're trying to compare. So definitely reach out to our office if you have questions once that process sort of begins. For our international students, there are private educational loans available. Currently, we are aware of 2 no cosigner options, meaning you would not need a U.S. citizen or permanent resident to cosign on the loans. Those are through Prodigy Finance and Empower Financing. Definitely take a look at those if you are an international student. They do not, Prodigy has limitations on which countries of origin they can lend to. Empower doesn't have as many, but definitely take a look to see if those are options for you as an international student, if you know that you're going to need to borrow. If you're an international student who has a U.S. citizen or permanent resident in your life who is willing to co-sign, you will have more options. They will be similar to the options for domestic students for private loans, meaning interest rates could be fixed or variable, and most of those would be tiered. For all of these loans, you are subject to that total cost of attendance in terms of your borrowing, but the lender themselves may have a lower aggregate cap on what you can borrow. So for our international students, we encourage you to begin looking at that process now. Domestic students, you can start looking and making a plan, but don't really take any action except maybe completing the FAFSA. Don't apply for private loans quite yet. It's a little bit too soon for those U.S. citizens because the inquiry into your credit could expire before the loan disperses, meaning you would have to reapply again. So the timing of all of this is really next month, May. You're making a plan now, but action steps will begin next month, with the exception of our international students who are looking at Prodigy or Empower. We encourage you to look at those and start the process applying with them. For those lenders, sometimes the approval and application process can actually take several months. So definitely take a look as you make this plan. And for our international students who are, looking to include borrowing on their I-20, know that the approval letter that you get from the lender and not the certification from the school is generally what is requested and needed and sufficient. So the school, if you've applied in April for a private loan and we have not certified that and will not certify that loan until, say, June, after tuition and fees have been finalized, as you continue the I-20 application process, you would just use the pre-approval or the approval letter from the lender and nothing from Columbia as you submit those applications. And I think there were a couple of questions in the RSVP about the amount for the I-20. You need to speak directly with the ISSO. Financial aid doesn't answer questions about your I-20 application, so we can't provide you with assistance on that. But the ISSO definitely is able to help you if you're sort of still determining how to complete those. So what should you be doing now? At the end of this presentation, there is an admitted students timeline, as I mentioned. Right now, you should be definitely looking at those online resources for fellowships and see if there are opportunities. Reach out to your department using that MA departmental contact list. Definitely take a look at the billing calculator so that you have a sense of what those charges are. Know that that is definitely estimated right now. In June, once everything's been finalized, the calculator will also reflect actual charges and tuition and fees. So right now, that's just to get you a sense of rounded numbers. You can, if you are expecting to or planning to either take federal work study or any of the federal loan options, complete your FAFSA, the entrance counseling, and master promissory notes at any time. Private loan borrowers, you're going to complete that directly with your lender. And you can probably begin that later this month or early May at the soonest when you should be doing that. International students for Prodigy and Empower, certainly take a look at that at this time. A note about the FAFSA. I think we get a lot of students reaching out who are asking, like, I submitted my FAFSA and I haven't heard anything back. We do not use your FAFSA to determine any type of aid. The FAFSA is essentially an indication to us that you would like to borrow loans, but we still don't certify any loans until you have submitted a request for loans or federal work study, which is a form that's on our website. You can see right now the 24-25 loan form. The 25-26 loan form will be launched later this month or in May. Again, it's just a little too early to actually take action on the loan process. But the first initial steps of completing the FAFSA, entrance counseling, the master promissory notes, those you don't need to have received anything from our office in order to complete those pieces. They don't have any amounts in there. So you'll just complete those application pieces. And then once you've completed a request for loan form, we would certify the loans, and all of those things will link up and have the loans ready for disbursement in the fall. A note as well about that, loans will disperse no more than 10 days before classes start. So you will not have access to any of the loans that you borrow for the fall semester until after the semester has begun. The refunds generally start to go out after the second week of classes, so in September. Make a plan that includes having money that gets you through the month of September. Again, if you are concerned about your credit approval for a Grad Plus, you can certainly reach out to our office and we can let you know what you can do to sort of make a plan for that. Your first bill notification going to happen in mid-August. It'll be due in mid to late September. If you're borrowing or you received any institutional scholarships, those will appear as anticipated credits when that bill has been generated. Again, anticipated credits, not actual, because the money won't start to roll into your account in reality until September, very, very late in August. Your tuition deposit is applied just towards those fall charges, so you should see a credit for that when you see that fall bill. The payment plan information, which is again managed by Student Financial Services, will be updated and available in early July, but you can take a look. It will be similar to what exists out there now. And I haven't mentioned this until now, but make sure you've cleared all your holds. One of the things that will delay your ability to register and delay any funding that you do plan to receive is if you have a hold on your university account. If you previously attended Columbia and have a balance hold from a prior degree program, or the number one cause of delays, the immunization requirements. Get those started now. If you wait until August to begin that process and submit those forms, note that there is one immunization office for the entirety of Columbia, and they are processing all of those immunization forms for the thousands of students who are coming to Columbia in the fall. So their processing time is approximately 2 weeks at least. When we get closer to the semester, it could be longer. So do that early. The best place to reach out is your undergrad institution. You likely had to submit those immunization records to them already. And when you do get to register in August, don't forget to add that enrollment category. No enrollment category, no student access. You're not a student until you have a residence unit on your account. Also note that if you are applying for federal loans, you have to take a minimum of 6 credits. So if you're thinking about taking the quarter residency unit, you need to have at least 6 credits underlying. If you enroll in a full residence or half residence, you have an equivalency of full-time or half-time. But for those of you who might be thinking about really the slow pace for the program of a quarter residence over multiple semesters, 6 credits is the minimum. And make a plan, connect with your department, reach out to us if you have questions as you continue through this process. If your plan changes, reach out to us and we can help you. Our contact information is here. I'm going to stop the share and take a look at a little bit of our Q&A. So let's see. All right. Whew, so let's get right into it. I see a couple of questions about the tuition deposit. I have a question regarding my non-refundable tuition deposit. If I'm awarded a scholarship, do I still have to pay the deposit to confirm my acceptance? The tuition deposits are all handled at the departmental level. So if you have questions about the deadline for your tuition deposit, or concerns about your ability to pay, reach out to your department and they can provide clarity or guidance about what your options are. I'm struggling to understand how to populate the billing calculator. Hopefully the little walkthrough in this session helped you to go through that. Are international students eligible for federal work study? No, the federal work study is limited to U.S. citizens and permanent residents because it requires the completion of the FAFSA and is a federal source of funding that is limited to U.S. citizens and other eligible permanent residents or non-citizens. You do, as an international student, have opportunities to work on campus. They just won't be through federal work study. How difficult is it to defer your acceptance? How I'm thinking about deferring. How do I reach out? What do I need to do? Deferment is handled by the Office of Admissions. There is a deadline for deferral of August 1st. So if you're thinking about that, speak with your department about what deferment means, whether you need to take any action steps and or reach out to admissions if you have questions about your options for deferring to a subsequent year. If we're being considered for a fellowship, when will we be notified? As I mentioned before, most departments notify scholarship recipients in the letter of admission, but some departments do have a separate notification process. And so you should work and reach out with your department to determine what that process is internally to that team. May I apply for scholarships for the second semester? This is a good question. And can international students apply for scholarships in their second term? So while there are scholarships that happen throughout the course of the academic year. Those initial scholarships from the department are generally determined upon admission for admission. Again, there could be opportunities for reconsideration or for other scholarships that happen in the second semester. So reach out to your department about that and make sure that you're paying attention to the upcoming fellowship page, as well as that biweekly notification, biweekly newsletter that has information about upcoming award opportunities. Okay, and I'll just do maybe one or two more. How I plan to relocate with my wife and my child. Congratulations. Does Columbia have suitable housing options for families? I want to know if I can have a dormitory. So there is housing available for graduate students. There is family housing available at Columbia. All of that is managed through Columbia Residential. We at GSAS, our student life team works most closely with housing. So if you do have questions about housing, I encourage you to reach out to Student Affairs, GSAS-Student Affairs at columbia.edu, and they can help direct you appropriately. But I would recommend reaching out to housing directly about the timeline, the process, and the application. A general sense is that international students are given priority and/or those students who are coming from farther away. So note that, but there is housing available. Housing is limited, but definitely if that's something that you need as a resource, reach out to housing now to understand the steps. I need to know the specific dates by which we would need to pay. As I mentioned before, the bills will be generated for the fall semester and spring semester respectively. The fall is going to happen in mid-August and be due in September, and it will be emailed to your University Columbia email. And then again, in the spring and December, you would get that billing notification. The Student Financial Services team has a billing schedule on their website. You can easily Google Student Financial Services Columbia billing schedule. Currently, that's the current year, 24-25, because we're still in that for the spring. A little bit later, probably early May, it will be updated with next year's schedule so that you can have exact dates if you need those. Couple of hot topic questions regarding the impact of Trump cuts and funding opportunities. The efforts, what will the effects of the Trump grant cuts on services affect? Will loans be restricted? So while we do know that there are several federal grant, and I think this will be my last question for today, we do know that there are federal grants that have been restricted, cut, paused, delayed. Federal student loans, federal work study, those are managed by Congress. And while there are some bills that are floating out there to limit or change how federal loans and work study may work, those are not going to, we expect, impact the current academic year, the upcoming 25-26 year, which goes into effect July 1st. It would require that all of those changes are implemented prior to, in most cases, July 1st. So while there could be changes if you're someone who's continuing it into a second year on your eligibility for or availability of certain federal loans or how those loans might function, we don't expect there to be changes to the federal loans as they exist currently for the coming 25-26 year. In terms of processing and timing, there may be some delays. If you're completing your FAFSA, generally in the past, it took one week, 5 business days to determine that result and send that to the school. We expect that maybe those might take a little bit longer, but things are still happening, even though these cuts are in place and these resources are still available, including the resource of all the people here who want to help you through this process. So I'm going to end on that. And we are looking forward to welcoming you this fall. Keep apprised of our website. We're going to post this video. We already have the last session from March posted on our website. Please do feel free to reach out if you have questions. We're happy to either help answer those questions if they're for us or direct you to the appropriate resources or people here at Columbia who can. And we are looking forward to welcoming you this fall. Have a great rest of your day.